So I did say we'd start on the dot, so let's get going. So we're focusing now on customer use cases, and I'm going to kick off looking at sharing some data from a survey I did, talking to a range of developers who maybe aren't part of the choir, and just to share some of my experiences with WebRTC. Then we'll go through a series of presentations from Appease, Apidays, Wildix, and also Alcatel-Lucent. That'll take us through till noon, and then we've got a series of back-to-back demos. So Amir is going to be moderating that session. I'll be frank, it's going to go on for longer than half an hour. So we'll most probably end up eating into a little bit of lunchtime. I think it'll mostly take us about 45 minutes to get through the demos. We'll break for lunch, and then we'll start again on the dot at 2. So let me share with you some of the insights around WebRTC, looking at sort of non-telecom developers, or shall we say less focused on telecom. So let's go back to 2010. So that's not the last World Cup, it's the World Cup before, okay? I was helping a small company, and they were focusing on this problem of enterprise communication and the desktop phone being a dinosaur, being expensive, and really not delivering on a whole range of customer needs. And the fact that mobile phones were becoming more and more prevalent. And of course, we've got all the problems of the variety of communication mechanisms, the fact that human latency is a big drain on the economy. And in fact, when you look at Uber, you look at Airbnb, all these services, what they've done is basically removed human latency out of particular transactions. That's all they've done. Airbnb now enables a buyer and seller of a room to get in touch and basically negotiate and agree very quickly. So that's just embedding communications within a particular web process, and the comms enables that application and the person to communicate effectively. And of course, we have all these ad hoc teams that need to come together, and these are just some of the slides that were used for the deck for pitching to VCs, and that was back in 2010. And even back then, given what Google was doing, it was clear that real-time communications was going to become embedded within the browser. So this startup was going to target the enterprise space, get some foothold, and then when magically all these web browsers had WebRTC implemented, that was going to be the secret sauce that would make it a mass market application, and everybody would become immensely rich and successful associated with a startup. Well, unfortunately, it spent a year trying to basically educate VCs on what WebRTC was. By the time we got to 2011, it was clear, once the standards guys were basically getting their work programs together, that it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. So I guess this is part of my history is I always tend to be painfully early to market on new technologies, and this is just repeating, I guess, something that I've done many times before. So that's just to say it's 5 years old, okay? When people say, oh, it's 2 years, it's 3 years, WebRTC, no, it's at least 5 years. Even Google says it's 5 years. So it's been around for a fair bit of time already, guys. So I'll have a few memes in here. Most of the people here are the choir on WebRTC, okay? And I think the question when we opened up was not who has used WebRTC, is who hasn't used it? And if they put the hands up, why the hell not, if you're attending this conference, because it is very easy to get access to. I think that's something that's important to understand, that with WebRTC, we've still got a long way to go, even though it's 5 years old. Now, I put together some fun graphs just to show from a broader web perspective where we are. So this is just, you can search terms in terms of WebRTC. You can see it's sort of, it's on a steep incline, started in 2011. I can add in a few other search terms. Here's RCS. And now, of course, yes, RCS can be for a range of different search terms, but hey, it's not trying to be scientific here, but we can see there's a gap, and it's sort of, it's on the decline, which it should be. And this, as I mentioned to Dean, I blame Dean for talking about RCS. I threw in join here, so yay, RCS is more popular than join, that zombie technology. So that's good. So we can see actually sort of we're doing better than stuff that has failed, even though the GSMA doesn't realize that. And of course, then once I started thinking about zombie, because of course of Dean's slides, I then had to search zombie and WebRTC. So yeah, there's sort of a bit of a difference there. Then if we look at more sensible search terms, SDN, of course, is one of these flavors. As we can see, there's growth there. So we can still see there's a pretty big gap to go in terms of growth. Also, I thought, oh yeah, VoIP. Now this one I found really interesting. VoIP here, you can see basically 2005, 2006 was the peak. And boy, has it come down as a search term. And we can see it's sort of getting pretty close to where some of the more popular terms are. But the bottom line is, in all those, that quick non-scientific search, is it's still very early days for WebRTC. And just for completeness, I had to do this once I started searching on zombie, is to have a look at, once upon a time, VoIP as a search term was more popular than zombie. I was amazed. But of course now, as you can see, this is the fashion. So anyway, that's just to say we're still very early days with WebRTC, even though it's been around 5 years. This is some slides I just cribbed from Google. Once upon a time, it was a whole range of different components. They brought it all together under this beautiful thing called WebRTC. And just again, taking directly from their slides, I show here that 5 years ago, there was a large gap, so innovation was slow. Today, the gap's smaller. I wouldn't describe it necessarily as a small gap, but innovation is faster. And you can see that just by the volume of companies, the volume of services that have WebRTC as a component within them. Now, of course, everything's relative. It may be a small gap from a Google perspective. It's actually pretty big for a lot of developers. I'm going to quantify that through some survey work I did. Now, it is very powerful. We've had the presentations. It covers a hell of a lot of stuff. So you can do a lot with WebRTC. It's not just that media engine. And this slide here captures, I think, what most developers understand when you start talking about WebRTC. Is you have basically an A and a B point. You can basically have a negotiation. The magic happens. That's all hidden away, and you get this secure, robust, low latency, peer-to-peer connection, and you can put anything and everything across there. So that is very cool, and that's what we keep talking about. But I think part of the challenge is to enable that. Well, you've got some things to do. There's the exchange of the bootstrap, choosing the parameters, choose the media, and debug, debug, debug. This I thought was nice when you got Google talking about legacy signaling. But this, I think, is where a lot of developers are really hitting roadblocks. And it's not just a little bit of debug in terms of it's your mistake. You've got a whole host of things to deal with. And RTC bugs are tough, okay? I've spent enough time trying to get basically demos working in different parts of the world for, I land at night, I got a workshop the following day, and of course the demos aren't working. And you're going through all the obvious stuff in terms of making sure you've got clear internet access, there's no firewalls in the way, and then you're sort of working through a number of problems. So this is where we start to lose people, and just the fact that it's a maturity issue. But it is. Real-time communications is hard. Let's not kid ourselves, okay? And putting it into a browser doesn't make all those difficulties go away. And this, again, just grabbing from a Google slide in terms of some of the advice, and this is actually very good advice. I use this slide a lot of times when I'm talking with developers. So, but what it's really saying is you need to understand the guts of WebRTC to really be able to debug it. And, to be honest, for most developers, that's their reaction. I mean, it's just, what are you expecting? This is hard, complex stuff. I'm expecting you to abstract that away, yet I've still got to get in and understand that. So what I did is I run an event called TADHack, Telecom Application Developer Hackathon. We ran it in June, 700 registered, 500 turned up. It's a global event. We run some surveys. So this is the pre-conference survey. So I'm just showing that we have a bias to Spain and Sri Lanka in the data. Mainly, it's app developers and students. There's a whole host of other geeks here. We asked them one question back in the pre-conference survey, where what tech is most interesting to your project. So if they selected WebRTC as one of the technologies that are of interest to the projects, we ignored them. So we talked to those developers that didn't have WebRTC as an important technology for their projects. Because it's like, if you're in real-time communications, then WebRTC should be pretty much top of the list. So there was about 60 people we talked to. We asked them some questions, asking, have you played with WebRTC? Most of them have. So it's not like they've ignored it. Most have played with it. Now, I'm just sharing with you some of the highlights, some of the funny stuff. Here are some of the quotes in terms of what did you think. Outside Chrome to Chrome, we couldn't get it to work most of the time, so gave up. Using WebRTC video on mobile phones seriously eats battery life. We've heard that quite a few times. Isn't WebRTC still in development? Well, yes, it is. The standard isn't ratified yet. So, I mean, there's still a lot of work to go. So, that, again, it's early days, even though it's been around for 5 years. It's much more complex than just a browser spec. There are many WebRTC API providers, other service providers, SDK vendors. You have to be an expert even to understand their offers. And it is. We're in the Wild West. We've got this explosion in different service providers, all trying to make a buck within this emerging technology category. And then excellent presentation yesterday on the data channel, and this just basically reinforces some of the practical experiences people are having in using WebRTC. So you've seen lots of Geoffrey Moore. From my perspective, I think it's a poor analogy because WebRTC is so much more than just a product. It's a set of technology, it's an ecosystem. So I think it's actually, the way I sort of compare it to, is actually looking at American history. So we've got the phases of American history. You've got the early explorers, the Wild West, the Civil War, the Progressive era, and then the modern era. So my view is we're here. Now, you can call that the gap. I don't see it as a gap. I see basically money being spent on WebRTC. I see services being deployed on WebRTC. So it's not like you're waiting for your next few customers to come in. I just see it as we've got different phases in the evolution of this industry. And we've pretty much explored the territory, and we've got a lot of the early explorers here in this room. Where we are now is this explosion in terms of the customers, in terms of the offers, some of the overlapping offers, and we're starting to deal with the sort of privacy and security issues. But as I mentioned in the panel yesterday, the fighting that's taken place, to be honest, has just been the standards guys. We've still got a civil war to come as people start to see the real money coming on the table. So I think that we'll go through a period of civil war. A lot of the emergent capabilities that sort of fall out, whether it's Apple, whether it's Google, whatever, will then get ratified within the standards. We'll reach this progressive area where we start to sort of see the market really taking off in terms of dominant innovations. And of course, we'll end up at some point where we don't even think about WebRTC. It'll be mature. It's just embedded within all our web experiences. But it's going to take us a while to get there. And we've been, for the last 5 years, sort of waiting for it to get there. And, to be fair, I hope we can move faster than we have in the previous 4. We don't want to be in this situation where we're still discussing the Civil War. Ideally, hopefully, we'll be in a far more advanced situation. But I think that's the dilemma we face as an industry, is how can we accelerate the adoption of WebRTC compared to what we've done? Because it's going to get more complex. I'm sorry for picking on GenBand, but we've got the big brands now coming in and saying, basically things like this. WebRTC changes everything. Come on. That's stupid, okay? It really is. You shouldn't say things like that. Also, you have things like this in Network World. WebRTC close to tipping point as Cisco, Microsoft announced products. I feel a little uncomfortable now. Once these guys start announcing products, is it really at a tipping point? we've only just started. It's going to be everywhere. And that's why when I'm highlighting the Civil War, you know, guys, you know, it's been the standards guys and us geeks basically going, this is really cool. And once the marketing guys get involved, because they don't really understand technology, they don't really understand the impact of technology, they just take whatever they're told and create a nice story around it. When I say story, they lie. All marketing is lies. So we've got a difficult time ahead. But, and this is a very important quote, the power of vested interests is vastly exaggerated compared with the gradual encroachment of ideas. So this is Keynes, and what he's saying is the vested interests, the big brands, when they start basically their bullshit marketing machines, guess what? They'll have to go where the money is. So it's going to be important for us as an industry to really help focus. So just summing up, the gap is still too big with WebRTC because we're pitching it too broadly. Look, you got point A, point B, you could do anything and everything. Well, yes and no. We need to get focused on what we can do practically in 2015, not in 2020. We all get the impact. It's going to be available across any web-connected device. We get it. But let's get focused on what we can do practically, given limitations in browsers, particular sort of use cases that can be done. Vested interests have only just got started. It's going to get a lot more noisy, a lot more confused. So let's stop preaching to the choir and let's get focused on building some market successes. And we are. I think we just need to sort of recognize that this is the most important thing that we can do. Else, to be frank, we'll be here at a WebRTC Paris event in 2020 and still discussing the WebRTC Civil War. So I guess my comment is everything is awesome, but also let's just be a little bit more sort of practical and focused and understand that we are the choir. We are the early adopters. So let's help the rest of the industry understand where they can use WebRTC effectively in 2015, not the big vision. So that's my piece, based and hopefully gave you a few insights into what non-telecom developers are thinking about. So any questions on my presentation before we move on? If not, that's good, because that helps us keep to time. What I'd like to do is to ask Michelle if you could please take the stand. Thank you.